Welcome to Success in Medicine. I'm Dr. Samir Desai. From time to time, on this podcast, I like to answer questions submitted by our listeners. Here's a question that we recently received from Anna. Dr. Desai, I'm a sophomore in college and planning to apply to medical school next year. I've been researching medical school websites, and I have a question for you about letters of recommendation. I know letters of recommendation are an important part of the medical school application, but I'm confused about whether to send a pre-medical committee letter or individual letters of recommendation. Thank you so much. Signed, Anna. Well, Anna, thank you for sending us your question. I think it's great that you're researching medical schools well in advance of when you'll be applying. Let's start by talking about how important letters of recommendation are to medical school admissions committees. Several years ago, the AAMC surveyed medical schools to determine what factors were most important in the admissions process. What they did was to present medical schools with a list of factors or criteria, and then they asked schools to rate each factor on a scale of 1 to 5. A rating of 1 meant that the factor was not important, while a rating of 5 meant the factor was very important. When schools were asked to rate the importance of recommendation letters when deciding whom to interview, letters were ranked 4th, just a tiny bit behind GPA and MCAT. Letters received a mean rating of 3.4. The top factor, which was cumulative science and math GPA, received a mean rating of 3.7. The AAMC also asked schools to rate the importance of letters in deciding whom to offer acceptances. How important were letters of recommendation in deciding whom to accept? Letters were ranked 2nd, only behind the interview score. Given the importance of recommendation letters in this admissions process, it's important to make the right decisions. I can tell you from experience that missteps are common with letters of recommendation, and these errors prevent qualified applicants from gaining admission to medical school every year. Now that we've talked about the importance of letters, let's get back to Anna's question. Before I answer her question, I would like to start by first discussing what a pre-medical committee letter is. Colleges and universities often have a pre-medical advisory committee. You should know that this committee may not be called the pre-medical advisory committee. At some colleges, they're called health committees. At other institutions, they're called health professions advisory committees. For the purposes of this podcast, we'll just refer to them as the pre-medical committee. So what is a pre-medical committee? A pre-medical committee usually includes a number of individuals at an institution who are heavily involved in the pre-medical advisory process. Although the nature and makeup of these committees do vary from one institution to another, the typical makeup of the committee includes a combination of pre-health advisors and faculty members. One of the major responsibilities of the pre-medical committee is to write letters of evaluation for students at the school who are applying to medical school. This is known as the pre-medical committee letter. How does a pre-medical committee develop this letter? The way in which this letter is developed can vary from school to school, but schools generally have a policy or process in place to produce this letter. Usually, committees ask students to submit a CV, personal statement, and letters of recommendation from those who know you well. Some committees even require applicants to appear before one or more members for an interview. After completing this process, the committee will have detailed information to write their letter. Generally, within this letter will be important information about your credentials, your accomplishments, and your achievements, both inside and outside the classroom. The pre-medical committee letter will typically include information about your experiences with respect to community service, leadership, and research, as well as other activities medical schools would be particularly interested in. The letter may also include comments or quotations from people who know you well. These may be professors with whom you've worked, physicians with whom you've shadowed, and others. While some committee letters will include quotations from these people, others will attach letters of recommendation from these individuals to the back of their letter of evaluation. What else may be found in a pre-medical committee letter? Letters may also include an overall assessment of how strong of an applicant you are for medical school. You should also know that some schools may even rank you in relation to others who are applying to medical school in your year. Some of you, as you're listening to this, may be thinking that this sounds like quite an involved process, and it can be. You may even be thinking that it would be much easier just to send individual letters of recommendation. You may be thinking that it's risky to get a pre-medical committee letter. So why not just skip the pre-medical committee letter and opt for individual letters of recommendation? The reason is some medical schools require the pre-medical committee letter. In a 2016 survey conducted by the AAMC inquiring about policies regarding letters of recommendation for application to medical school, 11 medical schools were found to require the pre-medical committee letter. I know what some of you are thinking. Only 11 schools? Well, I can still get into medical school without getting a pre-medical committee letter. But it's not that simple. Although only 11 out of the 107 allopathic medical schools that responded to this survey require the pre-medical committee letter, a much larger number of schools prefer this letter. According to the survey, 58 medical schools prefer the letter. So to summarize this data, 64% of medical schools responding to this survey indicated that they either require or prefer the pre-medical committee letter. Given this data, Anna, my recommendation to you is to do both. Get a pre-medical committee letter as well as individual letters of recommendation. Why? Well, first, you will need to send individual letters of recommendation to the pre-medical committee. The pre-medical committee will then use the individual letters of recommendation to help them create your pre-medical committee letter of evaluation. Second, for those schools that do not require or prefer the pre-medical committee letter, you can elect to send individual letters of recommendation in lieu of the pre-medical committee letter. With this approach, you've covered all your bases. One word of caution. If you choose not to obtain a pre-medical committee letter at a school that has a pre-medical committee, you will be asked by medical schools why you chose not to do so. And the reason that you give will certainly play a role in your chances of receiving an interview offer. Sometimes, however, schools will make exceptions to their rules. For example, you may attend a college which does not have a pre-medical committee, in which case sending individual letters of recommendation may be just fine. One final tip for those of you who are attending a college which has a pre-medical committee letter process, and that is to do what Anna did. Start researching the process at your school well in advance. That way, you will not miss any deadlines related to the process of securing the pre-medical committee letter. since it's a process that takes time. It may start as early as the fall before the year in which you apply. Anna, I want to thank you again for your question, and I wish you the best of luck as you move forward with your efforts to secure your place in medical school. In a future episode of the Success in Medicine podcast, we will talk about what you can do to maximize the chances of obtaining an outstanding letter of recommendation from the pre-medical committee. As always, don't forget to visit us at our website, thesuccessfulmatch.com, where we have additional resources for students seeking admission to medical school. And if you have a moment, please do rate and review us at iTunes. It does help get the word out about our podcast, and we would really appreciate it. Thank you for listening to the Success in Medicine podcast. Until next time, I'm Dr. Samir Desai.